They're right there. Imagine those and what it's going to look like. So get on both sides, face the street.
Nice to meet you. Well, thank you for coming.
This is the Rally 101 training here. Get on right behind me. Don't be shy. Step right up.
Jonathan, get up there.
Okay, everybody here. What do we want? Stop the evictions. When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
Mayor Lee, what do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
Tell our mayor, what do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Stop the evictions.
When do we want it?
Now.
Thank you. And that's exactly why we're here today. We're here to tell Mayor Lee to stop the evictions. He has it within his power to make a huge dent in the eviction crisis in San Francisco. His power that he has is to allow for an amazing package of tenant protections that just went through the Board of Supervisors at City Hall to continue to become law. Yet, here he is at the 11th hour threatening to veto it. Is that okay?
No. He didn't even get elected.
Can tenants handle that?
No.
Should tenants have to wait one more night to wait and see whether the mayor is going to veto this important package of tenant protections?
No.
That's right, and that's why we're here to see if we can push the process ahead a little sooner here. We want the mayor to make a decision. Make it now. Don't veto the legislation, or go ahead and veto it and pay the price.
Sign it. Sign it. Sign it now. Sign it now.
Sign it now. Sign it now. Sign it now. Sign it now. Sign it now. Now I'm gonna give a little backstory quickly on this, on why we're all here today. And by the way, I'm Sarah Short with the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. The backstory is that tenants have been being evicted from this city in droves, in increasing numbers as the months move forward, for ridiculous reasons, such as hanging laundry or having bicycles in the hall or having a goldfish. More and more tenants are losing their rent-controlled homes and being forced from the city because landlords are getting greedy, they're getting greedier, and they are simply trumping up charges. They are simply making mountains out of molehills for very small lease violations, going to court and actually evicting tenants. Why? Greed. Why? So they can flip those units and get much, much more for the rent. That is all they care about, and we want to end to this. So what the tenants have done, they weren't going to stand for that. The tenants have done is come to City Hall and say, we want change, we want protections. They've worked very closely with Supervisor Jane Kim, an amazing ally in this. And lo and behold, because of all the hard work and organizing and all of the absolutely very real horror stories the tenants brought to the public, we passed Eviction Protections 2.0. Yes. That's right, you heard me correctly. We passed Eviction Protections 2.0 at the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah.
This legislation will bring greatly needed relief to the renters of San Francisco who have been living in fear and being booted from their homes of many years because of landlords using shifty tactics without being checked, and tenants living in having to simply pack up and go. And is it right?
No!
Is that all right?
No!
No way, hell no. So yes, back to the story. We won Eviction Protections 2.0 at City Hall through the Board of Supervisors. Since then, the mayor, who calls himself a housing mayor, who has a history and background, many, many, many years ago now, of working on tenant rights and civil rights, has now said he may go ahead and veto this important legislation. In my opinion, we should not have to be here. It is a shame, an absolute shame, that the mayor has even gotten this far in claiming that he might go ahead and veto that legislation and deprive thousands of San Francisco tenants of critically important protections from eviction during a housing crisis. So we're here today to say, sign it now! 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 So, I want to introduce the author of this legislation, someone who's been a seriously, critically important champion of tenant rights, and who particularly stayed strong on this legislation, really heard the voices of tenants. Real tenants with real stories, who told her what the problems were, and she went to work fixing it. Here is Jane Kim, Supervisor Jane Kim.
Thank you, Sarah. Eviction 2.0, as many of you know, is the strongest tenant protection legislation that the city has passed in the last 5 years. And I am proud to be the author of this legislation. This legislation will finally give tenants something to counter the rising tide of these frivolous evictions and greed incentivized evictions that we are seeing throughout the city. Unfortunately, it is due to these real painful stories that make up what we call the eviction crisis today that we were able to pass this incredibly strong piece of legislation. Now, I know many of you have read one of the stories that came out this morning in the Chronicle. One of my colleagues representing the district north of me has stated that I made up horror stories about these unscrupulous evictions. She said, quote, Jane can bring out these horror stories, most of which have not taken place even in California. Well, I think my colleague needs to meet some of her neighbors and perhaps some other residents around the state of California. So if you represent one of these heartbreaking stories of another resident who has been threatened with an eviction or has been evicted, I think Supervisor Christensen needs to hear it. Now, originally my speech was not going to be about the upcoming November election, but luckily for us here in San Francisco, and those of us that want to continue to see that we are fighting for real San Franciscans over the next 4 years, there is an alternative that is running for a seat today. And he has a proven 8-year track record as a policymaker who is fighting for working class residents, seniors, immigrants, and tenants. He's not just making campaign promises about what he'll do in the future. He's actually done it, and we've seen his record. We need a representative who is not out of touch with what's going on here in San Francisco. So I'm here today to proudly support Aaron Peskin. If you needed a reason to walk a precinct this weekend, this is the reason to go out. We cannot have colleagues that do not understand the real crisis that we are facing. I can't tell you the number of seniors that have come to our office, the number of immigrants who speak English as a second language, the number of even just young, middle-class residents that are getting pushed out of the city. Passing Eviction Protection 2.0 was an enormous feat, and we won it because of your stories, your real stories. So share your real stories. We passed out flyers today. We have a hashtag, Dear Julie, I'm real. With the passage of this legislation, hundreds of San Francisco residents now have a fighting chance of staying in their home and in the city they love. So now, let's fight. Thank you.
And she really has been fighting for us, folks. Another round of applause for Supervisor Jane Kim. Mayor Lee, we are watching you. Mayor Lee, the tenants of San Francisco are watching you. Mayor Lee, the tenants who are at risk of eviction today are watching you right now. Mayor Lee, the tenants of San Francisco who cannot sleep at night for fear that they will lose their homes are watching you. Mayor Lee, the tenants who are being harassed by their landlords and being told to get on out to make way for higher income tenants, they are watching you.
Sign it now.
Mayor Lee, the countless tenants who have been displaced from this city and no longer can call it their home, but still have their friends and families who are hanging on by a thread, they are watching you. Mayor Lee, the homeowners and the neighbors and the citizens and residents of San Francisco are all watching you for fear that they will be next to lose their neighbor, their schools, their child's teachers, their postal worker, their barista. They are watching you, Mayor Lee. And not only are they watching, they're here to tell you to sign it now. 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 Sign it now.
Sign it now. Sign it now.
So, to close it out, we have Maria Zamudio from Causa Justa, Just Cause. She's going to tell you a little bit about the sad stories of real tenants and why we need these protections so vitally.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for the support that we've had for the last couple of weeks and last couple of months. We know Eviction Protections 2.0 came out of real work that we all have done. We passed it at the Board of Supervisors, which is no small feat. So today we're here to ask the mayor to sign it now. But we're also here to celebrate the incredible amount of work that we have been doing for months and for years to stem this eviction crisis, which has now bled into the rest of the region. San Francisco is leading the region in displacement and housing and the housing crisis. But we don't want that to be our legacy. We don't want that to be what we're known for. San Francisco's too good for that, right? We need San Francisco to be leading the region in solutions. So real solutions like Eviction Protections 2.0. So, we've heard from Supervisor Jane Kim that members of the Board of Supervisors don't believe that the housing crisis is as dire as we say it is.
They're lying. They know.
Thank you.
They know. They know.
But we know that the hundreds of people that come into our offices every single day, they are not lying. They are not exaggerating. They are living their lives every single day, trying to just make it in San Francisco. And they're just trying to live every day in peace. One of the reasons why Causa Justa is pushing so hard for Eviction Protections 2.0 is because of families that come into our office every day and tell us the most ridiculous stories. I'm getting evicted. I'm getting a 3-day notice because I have a turtle. A turtle that protects or that helps this family's children be able to come home and say, you know what, there's a little bit of happiness in my life when I come home. I have my little pet, I have my turtle. San Francisco is better than evicting working class families for having pets, for having turtles. So we're really hoping that tomorrow, Friday, evictions based on having turtles, evictions based on having your partner live with you, evictions based on having strollers in your hallway, that doesn't get to happen in San Francisco anymore. We are at the 24-hour countdown, and we're letting Mayor Lee know in 24 hours we could have a new San Francisco where tenant rights are respected. Yes. Or we could have a San Francisco that's more of the same, more business as usual, more evictions here and around the region. And we don't want that, right? That's not the kind of San Francisco we want. So what we want to do now is, in the last couple of days, we've rallied all of our communities. Labor, faith, and community-based organizations have come out. They've signed letters, we've sent tweets, we've emailed, we've called the mayor's office, and we've said, what have we said? Sign it.
Sign it.
All of that. We've said all of that. And we're going to continue to do that today, right? So we have a letter that's signed by 56 different organizations. Like I said, faith, labor, and community-based organizations. And so we're going to go today to the mayor's office and we're going to drop it off. He's saying he hasn't heard enough from us, that we're not letting him know enough about this crisis. So if he wants to see all of us, we are happy to go into room 200 and drop this letter off. Who's ready to go into room 200? Awesome.
So we're waiting. Here they come. I took the elevator, but here they come. So we want the mayor to sign this legislation. Sign it now. Eviction protection. Sign it now. They locked the door.
Sign it now.
This is our door.
Sign it now. Eviction protection.
My city.
Eviction protection.
Sign it now.
Eviction protection.
Sign it now.
Eviction protection.
Sign it now.
Eviction protection. Sign it now. Eviction protection. Sign it now. Eviction protection. Sign it now. Eviction protection. Sign it now. Eviction protection. Sign it now.
This is the fifth time.
This is not
Not an open door.
it's not something we're not used to, right? Every time the community comes to City Hall,
They
we're
block.
encountered with a locked door at the mayor's office.
And a blocked door.
And we are here because 56 labor, community, and faith organizations said we need eviction protections now. He needs to sign it now.
Yeah, that's right.
Stop dragging your feet, Mayor Lee.
Stop dragging your feet.
But what we find is a locked door. How can we turn in our letter? How can we talk to our mayor? How can we talk to the elected official that has the power to sign or veto a policy that would support thousands of tenants being able to stay in their home when the door is locked?
Gotta have money.
$1 million to get through that.
Let's print some up.
So we have our letter, and we want to drop it off.
Do you want to just slide it under?
We'll slide it under. I'm sorry we didn't bring our bag of cash today.
And who's City Hall? Who's City Hall? Our City Hall! Who's City Hall?
to Kristensen's office now.
We can go, but
She's a
first I
denier.
wanna, because they're not opening the door and we can't read our letter, I'll read a part of it and then we can read all the organizations that actually are here, right? We are a small contingent of people, but there are other organizations behind us. There are thousands of tenants behind us. We're actually here as representatives of a huge tenants' rights movement. So, this is a very long letter. I won't read all of it, but I'll read a part of it, and then maybe we can people's mic some of it so that they hear us in there. As is evident, from the present surge in evictions, too many landlords are using every pretext and opportunity to evict tenants. In order to take advantage of today's extraordinary rents. Landlords are treating minor transgressions as grounds for evictions. Refusing to allow tenants to have roommates without good cause. And rushing to court without providing tenants a real opportunity to address landlords' concerns. Eviction Protections 2.0 addresses key gaps in our present law and provides thousands of San Franciscans with the rights they need to stay in their homes. For these reasons, we urge you to sign Eviction Protections 2.0.
We demand.
Respectfully,
Angrily.
All of it. Affordable Housing Alliance, AIDS Housing Alliance, AIDS Legal Referral Panel, ACE, Asian Law Caucus, Asian Neighborhood Design, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, SF Chapter, Asian Pacific Islander Legal Outreach, A Woman's Place, Bayview Hunters Point Community Legal, Bill Sorrell Housing Project, the Veterans Equity Center, California Faculty Association, SFSU Chapter, the California Nurses Association, Causa Justa Just Cause, Chinatown Community Development Center, Chinatown Coalition for Housing Justice, Chinese Progressive Association, Community Housing Partners, Community Tenants Association, Compass Family Services, Council of Community Housing Organizations, Curry Senior Center, De Maria Academy? The Marillac Academy. Thank you. That one. Dish. Dolores Street Community Services. Episcopal Community Services. Baseball Pools. Filipino Community Center. Glide. Grey Panthers. Rubio Project. Homeless Prenatal. Homie. Hospitality House. Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. IFC. IFPTE Local 21,
IFPTE Local 21,
La Colectiva, Migrante Soma, Mission Neighborhood Health Center,
Mission Neighborhood Health Center,
the Mission SRO Collaborative,
Mission SRO Collaborative,
Mujeres Unidas y Activas, National Union of Healthcare Workers,
National Union of Healthcare Workers,
Providence Foundation,
Providence Foundation,
the SF Anti-Displacement Coalition,
the SF Anti-Displacement Coalition,
the SF Labor Council,
SF Labor Council,
the Tenants Union,
the Tenants Union,
SEIU 1021,
SEIU 1021,
SEIU USWW,
SEIU USWW,
Senior Disability Action Network,
Senior Disability Action Network,
SHE-U Lane Central YMCA,
She Central YMCA,
SOMCAN,
SOMCAT,
St. Francis Living Room,
St. Francis Living Room,
Tenderloin Housing Committee,
Tenderloin Housing Committee,
TNDC,
TNDC,
Unite Here Local 2,
Unite Here Local 2,
and Young Workers United.
Young Workers United.